We are on the second hour of State Your Case. I'm George Korda, your host. This is Newstalk 98.7, the news and talk of East Tennessee. And my guest is for the next half hour, is Dan Mariaschin, who is the CEO of the International Organization of B'nai B'rith. And I want to bring him on here. Dan, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, George. Thank you for having me today.
All right. For people who aren't familiar with your organization, kind of give us a quick thumbnail sketch, please.
Yeah, B'nai B'rith was founded 180 years ago in 1843. It's the oldest of the Jewish organizations. It was founded in New York, but became an international Jewish membership organization. We have members all over the world. We do a lot of things, including providing housing, affordable housing for seniors, raising funds for disaster relief. But we spend a good deal of our time, and have over the last several decades, in trying to call out bias against Israel at the United Nations, where we are accredited, and also fighting anti-Semitism, which, of course, has taken a tremendous spike, as we all know, worldwide.
What was your reaction when you saw the White House press secretary being asked about anti-Semitism, a rise in anti-Semitism in the country, and immediately start talking about Islamophobia as a problem?
Well, the first thing that came to my mind was the FBI Director Chris Wray, who is at his most recent testimony, said that 60% of all religion-based hate crimes in this country are committed against Jews. 60%. And, we're about 2.2% of the population in this country. So just think about the numbers that we're talking about, hundreds and hundreds of incidents. The fight against anti-Semitism needs full support of everyone in this country. The administration has called together a task force to fight anti-Semitism, but let's remember those numbers. 60% of all hate crimes committed against Jews.
Well, what is the B'nai B'rith? How do you fight anti-Semitism? How do you fight an idea like that?
Well, this is something we've been doing for a long time. I mean, you try to educate, you try to tell people about the Jewish community, about Jewish history. Our problem, George, a lot of our problems in this country today, particularly among young people, is that everybody thinks history was invented about 15 minutes ago. And there's no real knowledge about the Jewish contributions, for example, let's say in this country, to all manner of fields in our country. There's no understanding at all, certainly, about the history of the state of Israel. We are really fighting a great deal of ignorance, and ignorance breeds hatred.
What is your assessment of what's happening on American college campuses?
Well, this is an outrage. It's an outrage. I have the feeling that many of these major demonstrations are not just happening like that. I think there's probably some funding and some money going into this. There's probably some advice on how to organize. But I would say, many of these kids who are out there talking about from the river to the sea, Palestine must be free, which, of course, is a call for the elimination of the state of Israel. Most of these kids couldn't find Israel or Gaza on a map if they tried. I believe they're being manipulated. They're being manipulated oftentimes by their professors. They're being manipulated by social media. They're being manipulated in many times by a good part of the major media in this country. And frankly, there's not really a lot of knowledge exactly about what Israel is all about, what the Israeli-Palestinian issue is all about. And if I can get even more specific, what happened on October 7th? What happened on October 7th was just an outrage. It was a glimpse into what the world experienced when the Nazis were in control of Europe during the Holocaust and during World War II. So a lot of ignorance and a lot of manipulation.
You have some members of Congress, like Representative Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, who are staunchly anti-Israel. How do you counter them?
Well, when Rashida Tlaib was sworn in, the day she was sworn in her first term, she immediately wrapped herself in the Palestinian flag. So that should have been some indication about where her sentiments lie. Same goes with Ilhan Omar, and not only Ilhan Omar, but others as well. Look, the issue of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, if you will, is an issue that is not given to easy solutions. What Omar has done and what Rashida Tlaib have done is they have incited. They are inciting crowds. They are inciting young people. They are inciting against Israel, and they need to be called out for it, which we are doing.
Well, I mentioned on the show a few weeks ago, my wife and I were in Israel a few years ago, and we were in Nazareth. We were doing a tour that day of sites from the ministry of Jesus. And we were in Nazareth, and I saw this rather fascinating billboard. It was this huge billboard, and it said something along the lines of Islam is the only religion, and anyone who doesn't follow it will be the losers. And it was obviously advocating Islam. And I thought that was pretty remarkable. I'm standing in a city in Israel, and I'm looking at a sign that would not be allowed in any Muslim country advocating Judaism or Christianity, and thinking, how is it that people who think that Israel is some sort of hideous apartheid state don't understand that roughly, I think it is, a quarter of the population is Arabic of the nation of Israel? And
that's right.
Why do you think there's this ignorance?
Well,
or do you think it's rooted strictly in people who, for their own personal reasons, their own upbringing, whatever, just don't like or hate Jews?
Well, that's a good part of it, that they don't like or hate Jews. By the way, they don't like or hate or they hate Christians as well. I mean, Hamas is an organization that is sworn to Israel's destruction, and you saw what happened on October 7th in killing Jews. But for sure, their attitude toward Christians is the same. I mean, you could say Christians would be next. Look, you're right. 25% of the population is Arab inside Israel. Total freedom of religion. Everyone is allowed to worship as they wish. They have their own TV, their own radio, their own newspapers. By the way, many Israeli Arabs serve in important positions in Israel. They're judges, they're teachers, they're pharmacists, they're doctors, they're nurses. There is absolute freedom of religion here. That's not what Hamas wants. That's not what the Palestinian extremists want. They want an end to Israel, and they want an end to the Jewish people. And that was very seen in a very serious way on the 7th of October. But there is that lack of knowledge. And let me tell you one other thing, George, let me put it in Tennessee terms. What happened on October 7th, just to give you an idea of what Hamas is all about. It would be as if from Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi, there were thousands of terrorists who crossed the border, attacking towns and villages along the Tennessee border. And then, at the same time, firing over now a period of 1 month, 8,000 rockets into Knoxville and Nashville and Memphis. That's exactly what happened on October 7th and now continuing down through the present. So when we talk about a lack of knowledge, or I would say something else. For a lot of the folks who are critical of Israel, highly critical of Israel, hate Israel, their attitude is, don't confuse me with the facts. Don't confuse me with the facts. You hear it all the time. If you say, well, what about the beheading of babies? And what about the rapes? And what about the killing of families, whole families in their homes, in their beds, at their breakfast tables on October 7th? The answer is, and I've seen it, we've all seen it on TV and some of these film clips, where they say, well, what's the proof? What proof do you have? This is what we have. Don't confuse me with the facts. And that's what we're fighting against today. It's not only a war in Gaza to defeat Hamas, it's also, you mentioned earlier, an idea. It's also an idea, this idea of intolerance, and more than intolerance, of hatred. toward Jews and toward Christians that we're really fighting.
All right, we have to take a break. This is George Korda. This stage of case. My guest is Dan Mariaschin, the CEO of B'nai B'rith International. We'll be right back. All right, we're back on State Your Case. I'm George Korda. My guest is Dan Mariaschin, who is the CEO of B'nai B'rith International. He's on the phone with us from Washington, D.C., and it's great to have you on. Now, what is your organization doing in Israel right now?
Well, right now, over 300,000 young men and women have been called up to serve in their reserves, serve in the army. There are a lot of needs for those soldiers, basic needs. In addition, over 200,000 Israelis have been displaced as a result of the war along the southern border, which is the Gaza border, and also on the north, in the Lebanese border. There are whole cities that have been evacuated, and they've had to be accommodated somewhere else in the country. So what we're doing is we've got on the ground, we have B'nai B'rith in Israel, local volunteers. We've got 600 folks who are working day in and day out, putting together packages of basic grocery needs, giving stipends for groceries that they may need, packages of personal items. We are also helping those who survived from those villages and kibbutzim along the border with Gaza, helping those families to rebuild their lives also with food packages and other basic needs. And we've also been packing boxes of personal needs for soldiers who are out there doing the fighting and who need also a number of personal needs that we just made a big delivery. I just got a photograph today of some soldiers who received one of our deliveries. So we're working on the home front through B'nai B'rith Israel, and hopefully making an important contribution to helping people in need.
I suspect that your organization is getting demands or requests or something saying you need to support humanitarian aid to the people of Gaza. You need to help pressure Israel on a ceasefire to spare the people of Gaza. How do you respond to that? When
you raise an army, costs us trillions of dollars. The idea of raising an army is to be able to defeat and overwhelm your enemy. That's what armies are for. You don't fight wars to a draw. The whole idea is not to have a tie. It's to be able to defeat your enemy. Now, what we have here is an asymmetrical war. On the one hand, you have an enemy in Hamas that hides among the people. It uses its own people as human shields. So that means that they place their fighters, they place their launchers of rockets, they place their weapon stores, all of the things that they require for war, they hide among civilians. And let's go one step beyond. The brain trust of Hamas is operating this war from underneath the biggest hospital in Gaza, the Shifa Hospital. That's where they are. Indeed, underneath them, which is underneath the hospital, they've got hundreds of thousands of gallons of gasoline, which they use for the many tunnels that they have, hundreds of miles of tunnels underneath Gaza for ventilators and for that kind of thing. So it's an asymmetrical situation. Israelis are not looking to kill innocent civilians, but Israelis are looking to defeat Hamas. And in order to defeat Hamas, they're going to have to fight the way Hamas positions itself and situates itself. It's not good necessarily to make real comparisons, but let's take a look, even at World War II. When we wanted to shorten the war, we, the Allies, we engaged in carpet bombing, we engaged in firebombing in order to bring a quick end to the war. And it resulted in thousands and thousands of casualties. Israel is going out of its way. Do you know that many Israeli fighting units have attached to the unit a lawyer from the Judge Advocate General's Corps of the Israel Defense Forces to make sure that that the slightest harm is caused to innocent civilians. But as long as Hamas surrounds itself this way, and as long as Hamas is in tunnels, and as long as they're underneath hospitals, in order to defeat that enemy, in order to defeat them, Israel will have to play by their rules in some cases.
Well, here's something to the point you raised a moment ago, because there's a lot of talk about fuel needs to be gotten into Gaza in order to help run hospitals, etc. This is from NBC News. Here's the headline: Hamas is hoarding vast amounts of fuel as Gaza hospitals run low, U.S. officials say. UN officials warned that aid groups, water treatment plants, and bakeries in the enclave are running dangerously low on fuel. And so what this suggests, or not doesn't suggest, it screams it quite loudly, is that Hamas, which has all this fuel hoarded, it doesn't care about the people of Gaza. It cares about killing Israelis. And if people of Gaza have to die in order for Hamas to kill Israelis, they're just going to have to die. That's essentially the position that Hamas is taking.
Right. So how do you defeat an enemy like that? You have to defeat an enemy. You have to be careful, and Israelis are careful. But at the same time, there is no other way to defeat this enemy. And all of these calls, for example, for additional assistance, that we're told that Hamas may have as much as 500,000 gallons of gasoline, which is untapped. They haven't used it yet, and they're going to use it for their own cause here, their own situation. By the way, the same is true for everything which is sent in. There are 100 relief trucks coming in every day, more than 100 still, even with the fighting. 100 relief trucks that are coming in with food and with other necessities. And you can be sure that Hamas is taking its share. It's taking its cut. This is a cutthroat, thug-like terrorist organization, no different than ISIS, no different than Al-Qaeda. And the difference is this. And let's put it again in Tennessee terms here if we can, George. The Kentucky border is 52, more or less 50 miles from Knoxville. In Israel, on October 7th, and I can tell you my cousins lived in a kibbutz 1 mile from Gaza. 1 mile. So we're talking about close quarters here. When we went to fight Al-Qaeda and we went to fight ISIS, we were talking about battles that were thousands of miles away. And that doesn't mean that for not for a minute. We absolutely did the right thing. But here we're talking about an enemy that's literally a mile away. And so for those who are calling on Israel for ceasefires and for pauses, why would you give Hamas, why would you give them the opportunity to regroup, to rearm? Why would you do that? This is a war, and there's a rhythm to war, there's a cadence to war. And that's what you have. And just in the middle of everything, to stop it would be a big mistake. And I don't think the Israelis, frankly, and I'm talking about Israelis from left to right, I don't think they're in a mood today to put on the brakes.
Are you concerned, or to what degree are you concerned, that the increasing calls in left of center media in the United States about and coverage of the Gaza civilians can erode political support for Israel among U.S. political leaders?
Well, Israel has been a tried and true ally from the very beginning, from its founding in 1948. There's a great deal of cooperation between the IDF and between our military. They're fighting the same battles and have over the years, not just necessarily on Hamas, but on other threats. And we haven't even talked about Iran. But I think what you're talking about in the media, George, it's kind of a hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil situation here. Again, it goes back to, do you consider what happened on October 7th to be a terrible terrorist outrage? And what's happened here is that for 3 days, much of the media said that. And now they've shifted over to the issue of of innocent civilians. Everybody's concerned about innocent civilians. But we don't see the same kind of sentiment for the innocent civilians. 1,500 lost their lives on October 7th, 5,200 injured, babies beheaded, all of those things that we know about. That's now kind of put aside. And listen, if it changes the political climate, it's unfortunate. We have a lot of good friends in the Congress. We have many good friends. We have good friends in state houses, in state assemblies, in state legislatures. There are a lot of great friends out there. And we need more friends. We need more people to understand what Israel as an ally is undergoing. We need them to understand that this terrible flow of anti-Semitism that has erupted as a result of this is simply wrong, and it has to be called out. So that's how we see it. This shouldn't be a political issue. This should be an issue of standing by an ally and understanding that what we did with Al-Qaeda and what we did with ISIS, Israel has to do with Hamas. It is the same fight. It is the same idea, and not to be so selective.
Final thought. I'm going to read a quote from a former Israeli prime minister, Golda Meir, who was prime minister from, I think, 1969 and 1974. And it's this, and it's important for listeners to remember that in 1974, it was only 29 years since the end of World War II and the full realization of what had happened during the Holocaust. And so here's what she said. If we have to have a choice between being dead and pitied and being alive with a bad image, we'd rather be alive and have the bad image. And there's not really many people out there of any persuasion who would disagree with that position, with those sentiments, if they were in the position that Israel finds itself. Final thoughts, Dan.
Well, Golda said it best. It's true. We can't worry about what is being said. You know, this is a fight, George. It's not only a fight against Hamas today and tomorrow. This was a terrible attack on the Jewish people. All of us felt this. We're still numbed by what happened because most of us were born after the Holocaust. But on that day, on October 7th, we got a glimpse into exactly what the Nazis did for 6 years straight, 24/7, 365. That's what they did. They killed Jews. They killed children. They killed senior citizens. That's what grandmas and grandpas, that's what they did. And that's what Hamas did. And to go back to your quote from Golda, that's why we feel the way we do. Regardless of what's being said, Israel has to do this not only for its own sake, for the sake of the Jewish people, and I might add, also for our sake. They are fighting a battle for the democracies. They are fighting a battle against terrorism, and we're going to be behind them 100%.
All right, Dan Mariaschin, international or CEO of B'nai B'rith International. Thank you very much, and don't be surprised if I get back with you in the future.
Thank you, George. Thanks for asking me today.
All right, thank you. Okay, we'll be back after this on State Your Case.